this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part 2 of my discussion with Karyn Buxman, a leading Euro humorist and expert in the power of humor. We continue our conversation by exploring advanced techniques for captivating large audiences and the nuances of using humor in leadership. Karyn talks about the differences between humor for entertainment and laughs versus humor in the workplace, how leaders can develop a sense for when humor is appropriate, and the importance of learning from those moments when humor doesn't quite land. Don't miss her valuable insights on becoming an effective leader through the strategic use of humor. In your book, you talk about the difference between humor initiators and humor appreciators. And I think that's important when you're talking to people who say, I'm not funny. I think, can you explain a little bit about what those two things are?
Yes, thanks. Again, going back to, the person whose brain wasn't wired to see funny. And so they weren't naturally being funny. And when we go back to those 3 purposes of humor, when you are an entertainer, and your goal is to entertain, your success is measured through laughter. It's important to be funny. But when your purpose is influence or your purpose is well-being, your goal isn't laughs per minute. And so you don't have to be funny. You want to see funny. You want to not necessarily be the humor initiator, but to be the humor appreciator. And for those who say, oh my gosh, I'm not funny, my response is great, because you don't have to be funny. There are so many ways that you can leverage other people's humor, other people's laughter. This is part of what we do when we come into organizations, is that we show them the variety of ways that they can leverage humor and help make that part of the culture. So again, it's authentic, and give them the parameters and give them the guidelines so that it is safe, that there's not bullying. Because again, humor can be a tool or a weapon, and we want to use our superpowers for good. I loved when you were talking about superpowers, because humor is my superpower. But rewiring the brain so that you can be the appreciator, and to see that. And out of that, so many wonderful experiences are going to come up naturally within what is going on in your environment. And that is a type of humor, that inside humor, that makes your team even more cohesive and more engaged. And so you don't have to be funny. You want to see funny is my mantra.
I like that one. To be funny, you have to see funny. Now, you've mentioned speaking, like working with the one-on-one person, the person from Australia, and you mentioned speaking to big groups. So having spoken to such diverse audiences, what strategies do you use really to engage and inspire them? And if I put my project manager hat on, or a leader of a group or a team, what are some techniques that I can use in my environment to facilitate?
That's a great question, Clint, because again, for you to be demonstrating that you have that sense of humor, and to be giving permission for others to use it, to be giving them some guidance, and to create an environment where there's the greater likelihood of experiencing humor. I remember working with a financial institution, and they took me on a tour. And as I toured one of the floors, and they had all of their cubicles, all the little gophers who were popping up and down, but they were given permission to just have fun with their space. And, you could tell the personality of each person by how they decorated it. There were Legos, and there was props, and there was this and there was that. But they also had different kinds of events or opportunities for people to get together and play as a whole. They even had a lounge area where they kept games and things like that. So what they were showing was that they had a culture. And with the opportunities for play and humor, they did not dictate what that was going to be. There was a multifaceted approach where, people from different departments could come together and say, this is what this might look like. And here's some things that we could do, because for some, it's like, oh, let's go, play softball or have a baseball team to play together. And that for certain groups with a corporate culture, that could be really great. There's some cultures where they were the last kid picked for any ball game. It's like you say, let's go play. And they're like, oh, but maybe there's a different way to engage them. To have opportunities to celebrate, to have opportunities to have fun. We've both worked with Forbes books. And one of the things that I noticed also, I think you played with us on your site, where when you run your cursor over an episode, it flips over. And for a period of time, Forbes books had their about page. Every person was identified by their picture. But what people didn't know, unless they ran their cursor over the pictures, was that it would flip. And behind was a funny picture of them with funny clothes on or funny props or whatever that might be. And it was very low key, but it demonstrated that, we have a sense of humor. And how can we demonstrate that? And to start thinking of ways strategically to incorporate this into your meetings. Could you start the meeting with, somebody tell us the funniest customer story you've had in the last month, or, what's the funniest complaint that you've got, because this is inside humor. It's not something that you would want to share necessarily with the outside world, but this inside humor can be so cohesive. And as individuals, to work on developing their sense of humor, because as leaders, this is going to be, I think, what is most influential is how do they exude and teach and guide this humor with others, and praising people when they're doing it right, and giving guidance when they cross the line, and showing them how to use it effectively. I would say for individuals, so that you can get started on this, the number one piece is to ask yourself, what's my story? Is my story and my assumptions that humor's everywhere around me? Or is my story, there's nothing funny happening where I work? And if you tap into your reticular activating system, most people have seen the movie Jerry Maguire, and there was that scene in there with Cuba Gooding Jr., who was like, show me the money, show me the money. I'm telling my reticular activating system, show me the funny, show me the funny. And the more we experience that, you now have material. Seek humor from your customers, from your team, from other people. Be a story gatherer. Create this library of material and visit it and revisit it so that you can pull in these humorous examples that come out of your culture, that come out of your joined experience. And this really will make a difference in the level of engagement and the level of satisfaction of your team. People are going to be lining up to want to work with you because word of mouth is the greatest recruiting tool. And if you have smart, funny people who are having a great time, they're going to attract other smart, funny, engaging, productive people as well.
I think two things that came to mind as you were talking. One is I did work at a lot of places where, because of the environment, there's some danger elements to it. And so they start every meeting off with a safety protocol of where's the closest exit. And, I've always felt like it just kicks the whole meeting off with this almost negative feel. If there's a fire, you got to go here. What if we could follow that with, now tell us your funniest story? So we balance that and bring it back into getting the meeting on a positive note, instead of what feels like, to me at least, on more of a negative, if the world falls apart, what are we going to do note. Exactly. So I think that's a good place to try to bring that in.
What you're also saying is, it reminds me, when you think outside of the box enough, then there is no box. That's a whole other conversation, because we've rewired our brain so effectively that we start seeing how to pull in from other fields. And when you were saying, okay, we've got, this meeting and we've got to give the safety requirements and we have to show where the nearest exit is. If I were in that position, I would do it as a flight attendant. All right, everybody, put your tray tables in the upright and locked position, and pay attention to your attendant here, because I'm going to give you the instructions. And I would just funny it up. It doesn't.
Yeah.
And here's a little just factoid, is that the shorter the humor, the less funny it has to be to get the payoff. If you are telling a 5-minute story, the payoff better be so fall down funny that they are leaking body fluids. But if it's a one-liner or it's a short bit of just a few seconds or under a minute, people are going to just think you are the best thing since Velcro, because you've just given them that hit of dopamine, that shot of serotonin, that boost of oxytocin, and a little dash of endorphins. And who wouldn't want more of that?
I think I could build off. That's great. Your whole flight attendant strategy, because now when I'm in sessions, I don't want people paying attention to their computers. I'll just say, please put away your computers until the no smoking light goes out or something.
Right.
Until and it never goes out.
Right.
Right. You're talking about the short hit versus the longer one. I think one of the greatest long form storytellers I loved, used to listen to Jerry Clower, and he would tell these stories, country based stories. And it was a long winded story, but boy, you got to the end, just gold.
Yes.
But you had to be invested.
Yes.
It was a long-winded story.
Invested. And we know right now that attention spans are shrinking, that people are so distracted, and the biggest compliment you can get these days on an evaluation is, oh, I didn't look at my phone. It's like, how there is so much entertainment right here. And while we don't need to entertain, we can leverage what the online industry has found and what the technology industry has found. And that is that if we can interject these little short bites to keep people engaged, to keep their attention, and every few minutes, whether it's a funny quote, like the quote that you were sharing with me ahead of time. Can you repeat that?
The single biggest problem in illusion is the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that is taking place.
Right. Those kinds of little quotes that you can throw in and out here and there are just the kind of humor. And again, that's not your quote. You didn't have to say a joke. You didn't have to bring out, make up a funny story. You're leveraging something that somebody else said, but because you are practiced at this, you have that innate sense of where you can throw that in. And that's part of what I think is so important for leaders, is to develop this skill. It is a skill set. I think that everybody is, with a healthy brain, is born with a sense of humor. I think many of us have had it educated out of us or socialized out of us, but we have it. And you can strengthen that skill set. I think anybody with a healthy brain can strengthen this skill set, whether you are an engineer, whether you are a rocket scientist. I was brought in to work with a group, and they said, it was a government related group. And they said everybody refers to one another by their title. They're not using names. They don't really know one another. And we want you to work with them and lower their stress and make them feel more connected. And oh, by the way, 100% of them test as introverts. It's like, But I went to work and I created an exercise for them. And by the end of the time together, I wish you could have witnessed the room. The entire room was cohesive. They were laughing together. They were sharing. They knew more about one another than when they entered that room. And it was the power of humor to bring that together and help make that happen. And so I can't say enough good things about a leader intentionally and strategically working on their own humor to make it authentic and to also explore ways to make it more of a part of the culture, which will help attract and retain the top talent that you're looking for.
And I think that you've said this a couple of times, and I think it's an important point, is there's a difference between, because sometimes people talk about humor and they think that means it's not serious. And you can have very serious situations in which you have humor, which is, of course, a flight attendant example. But if you're going into a surgery, your level of angst and stress is way up. Yeah. And so, of course, you want your surgeon to be a serious person, but it doesn't hurt if they have a light side. It can tell you a joke or say something that's going to bring your stress levels down, like, because you'll laugh a little bit and go, okay. Even though they're going to go in and be incredibly serious in the surgery itself, having that humor and the ability to bring in my stress levels down is so important, I think.
I worked in the OR and I've been behind those closed doors, and I'm not going to reveal too much what goes on behind, because then people might not be comfortable having surgery. But I will tell you that humor is incredibly important when people are undergoing surgery, because again, the tension, the stress, you don't want your surgeon to be lacking anything from his prefrontal cortex. And periodically there has to be that one-liner, that funny thing that somebody says, and they're not in there telling long jokes and stories, but there are a lot of zingers and one-liners that break the tension, and people are like, and back in focus. Break the tension, back in focus. You know, you want your leaders, you want the person who has their button, their finger on the button of the nuclear codes. I mean, you want them to be able to have 100% of their cognitive capacity. And how do you do that? You know, especially for leaders. You know, I created something called the cognitive capacity cascade, because the cognitive capacity is a snapshot at any given time. How much access do we have to our IQ? What is our ability to pull from that cognitive part of our brain and be intelligent? But humor connects the disassociated dots, which creates that connection, which is neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity allows us to increase the amount of what we can access in our brain. It enables us to see more, to be more creative, to be able to problem solve better. This neuroplasticity creates these neural networks that allow leaders to be able to better see into the future. And that is one of the leader's most important jobs in terms of leading, is also to be able to have vision. And you want to be able to have that vision, and humor can help through that process to help you be a better problem solver, to be more trustworthy, to be someone who is seen as confident. You know, people say, oh, I want you to teach me confidence. Confidence isn't a skill. Confidence is an outcome. And when you start practicing the skills of humor, just like you would practice any other skill, or whether that's a skill on the computer and on the keyboard, or whether that's the skill of giving a presentation and practicing, or whether it's the skill of being able to use this in your communication. This is something that can be taught, it can be honed, and you can see measurable differences. That's one of the things that I was excited about doing, was to be able to make this quantifiable and to be able to develop certain tools so that people could actually measure their progress, so that people could run scenarios through to see which of the competencies did we really nail and which of the competencies were we flailing. Because through this, now we've got feedback. And with the feedback, we can improve that process. One more quick piece is that one of the processes that I developed, I actually built upon, initially was created by Air Force pilot. And I'm drawing a blank on his name, but you can find this. He created something called the OODA loop, OODA. And with the OODA loop, what they were trying to do was help Air Force pilots to be able to see a situation and to, instinctively be able to react. But what they realized was that what they're really going through is this process of observing, orienting, then deciding, and then acting. And, then after you act, the loop repeats. You're observing what was the outcome. You're orienting to the situation at hand. You're deciding, given the various factors, what am I going to implement? And then you act upon that. And so we created the humor OODA loop for the management of humor, so that people who are more process oriented, leaders who are more, left brain, that this doesn't come to them naturally, we can give them the steps on how to use this. And, and hopefully it becomes something that's a natural skill set. But even if you don't naturally become funny, again, great, because it's not about you being funny. It's about you leveraging the power of humor and laughter for the benefits of you, your team, your organization, and the people you serve.
Wow. Powerful. So let's say we have that person that's on the fence right now that just says, this has been great. And I think she says a lot of good things, but I'm just not funny, or I'm afraid I'm going to step over the line. So you talk in the book about, not letting things blow up in your face. And I think earlier in the call, you mentioned that how do you not cross the line, and the line's always moving. But what are some of the common pitfalls that a leader might experience in trying to take this approach, and how can they avoid that?
I think that the one that I see misused the most frequently is about relationship and rapport. And we won't have time to go into all 7, but the competencies are rapport, the context, authenticity, safety. Can this hurt or harm somebody physically or emotionally? Because we see a lot of bullying and horizontal violence used. Content and delivery. Most people want to start with content and delivery because, again, they're thinking that they are entertaining somebody else. For me, those are not necessarily where you need to start, especially if you're somebody who is not doing presentations. If you are presenting, whether that's verbally or even in writing, you definitely need to know how to use those. But rapport, people, because of the way our brains are wired, we tend to assume, we know what that can do, but we tend to assume that we're more alike perhaps than we really are. You're from Atlanta and, another person is from Atlanta. And so it's like, so since we're going to love the same baseball team. Not necessarily true. And just because you have other things alike doesn't mean that you're going to have the same sense of humor. The context of what you share, what works for you at a happy hour with your buddies isn't necessarily going to be, even though those may be the same people, isn't going to be the kind of humor that you would use in a team meeting. So the context is important. Safety, I think as a leader, we really want to look at how do we keep this safe? And I know some people push back and they say, you're woke. And it's like, that just kind of makes me a little crazy because it's like, especially with humor, that's not a bad thing to say. As a leader, I want my team to feel safe. I want my team to not have to worry about somebody sniping at them or somebody that I don't know from another department using sarcasm. Sarcasm is great when you have a rapport and a trusting relationship, because sarcasm, I love sarcasm. A lot of people love sarcasm, but sarcasm is an aggressive humor. The root word of sarcasm means to tear the flesh. And if the other person doesn't know and trust you, now you have potentially hurt or maybe ruined that relationship. And so recognize that you have to have that connection, that feeling of safety to use certain kinds of humor and to recognize the context, to recognize the safety involved, and to recognize the distance, which can be temporal, it can be cognitive, it can be environmental, geographical. But at the peak of a crisis, humor's typically going to fall flat too soon. And that emotional distance is different for different people. A leader needs to know how to measure that, has to develop a sense for what's right. And you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. If you do cross the line, you address it. It's like, wow, I really missed on that one. I apologize. That's not who I want to be. That's not the kind of humor that we use in this organization or in our culture, and make it safe, because a lot of things that are totally fine, again, when your purpose is entertainment, not what you want to use and not the guidelines you want to give when your purpose is influence.
Yeah, I think comedians will I've heard them state this in the past, that their goal is to stretch the boundaries. And so if they're not offending some people along the way, then they're not doing their jobs, is how they put it. And of course, that's different. That's not the same thing you want to be as a leader in an organization. You're trying to get the team involved and get them on the same page, using that humor to break down some barriers. It's not to offend people in the process.
Exactly. And with entertainment, your audience is giving tacit approval. I bought a ticket. You know what? So I'm giving you permission. And if I don't like it, I can leave. A TV show, a special, a Netflix special, you're watching comedian, you've given tacit approval. But if you don't like it, you can turn it off. In your work environment, you don't have that ability. You can, if your boss is being mean-spirited and using put-down humor and calling people names or joking about something that they can't change about themselves, then that is not something that somebody can just turn off or exit the building. That you have to be more cognizant about that to be, in my opinion, to be somebody who's a very effective leader using this skill set.
It's interesting, as we close this up, I have a lightning round of questions to ask you, but you mentioned the root or the definition of sarcasm comes from a word that means tearing of the flesh. And so there's a guy on social media that, for whatever reason, the algorithm keeps putting him in my feed, and he's a fan of one of my favorite teams, but he is he's so sarcastic, and it's just so negative all the time. And it's like, I will never read anything purposely. I never click on it because it's like, I know it's going to be sarcastic and it's going to be some backhanded thing, and it's never positive. And I'm like, I know you love the same team that I do. Why is it just feels so negative. It's like it's like you're tearing my emotional flesh every time I read one of your posts. It's like, I can't do it.
And good for you for not clicking on it, because then the internet, just like your reticular activating system, it's going to give you more of that. Eventually it'll get tired, unwire, and go away.
So this has been amazing. And I've got 3 questions that I always end every interview with, but I'm going to add 2 more that I took out of your book. So I'm going to steal from you. The first one is, who is your favorite comedian?
Mike Birbiglia. And if you haven't seen the special, Thank God for Jokes, it is a teaching opportunity. I use that with all of my coaching clients, and we look at some of the various things he does, but he's a great cross between comedian and storyteller.
I'll definitely have to use the audio search for that one. I don't think I can spell that one. So.
Birbiglia. Mike Birbiglia.
Okay. Birbiglia. It's easier to spell than it sounds. How about, what is your favorite comedy show or movie?
Favorite comedy show would be Big Bang Theory.
Oh, yeah.
I love that show.
It's so funny on so many levels. Yeah, for sure.
So many levels, and just so many repeatables. Like, was that sarcasm? I love that show. We actually analyze that because, again, my left brain, I do have a left brain that loves analyzing humor. And we dissected, and we actually measured laughs per minute. And that show has so many laughs per minute that it does better than most stand-up comedians. It's incredible.
My son will hate me for this. He just turned 17, but when he was 6 or 7, Big Bang Theory was, of course, was in its height, and we're at a football game tailgating, and I'm watching my 6 or 7-year-old son. He's looking up at the tree and pointing, shaking his finger and saying something. And I go over, and his name is Hamilton. We call him Hammy. I said, Hammy, what's going on? And he points up in the tree and goes, Dad, they're stealing my oxygen. And I said, what? He goes, they're stealing my oxygen. I look up in the tree, and there are 2 kids at the top of the tree climbing. And as they're climbing, of course, leaves are falling. And he says, Dad, trees use leaves to convert carbon dioxide to oxygen, and they're stealing my oxygen.
Oh my!
And I said, Hammy, buddy, I love your logic, but if you ever hope to have friends, you don't unless you're Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, you don't open the conversation with, hey man, you're stealing my oxygen.
Oh, that is so good. That is so good.
so that's, he's Sheldon. I mean, he's not that way now, but it's just so funny. I'm like, I'm going to have a Sheldon on my hands here.
And if an example for leaders is that, if the group, and you can find this out by show of hands, but if the group knows some, Big Bang Theory, and everybody's like, oh yeah, I love that show, then you can pull one-liners and examples from that show. And again, you're not the person initiating the humor, you're leveraging it. And so that's a great example.
For sure. All right, my last 3 questions. Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
The leadership principles that I love are about intentionality. And I'm very intentional and in the moment about everything that I do or I aspire to be. Consistency is another. And, the leadership principle of lead with levity. I mean, that's my guiding principle that I tell others and that I live by.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Besides, don't eat yellow snow. I think that the best piece of advice that I've ever been given would be that everybody's doing the best they can with the tools they have at the time, and to be able to give people some slack, to step into another person's shoes and listen with the intention of hearing what that other person has to say, and not what am I going to say next. To just be present and to listen, and you will pick up so much, including a lot of clues as to what they like about humor. But to be a good listener, I think, is the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, which was hard initially for a speaker. It was like, help, I'm talking and I can't shut up.
Do you have a wrist bracelet that, like the medic alert bracelet that says that? Speaking and I can't shut up. Yeah, it reminds me of one of the first guests I had on the show was Allison Wood Brooks from, I think it was Harvard. And if it's not, I apologize. I think it's Harvard. Pretty sure it's Harvard. And she talked about boomer asking, which is people who are not what you just described, people who are the opposite, where they ask a question only so they can get the ball back in their court and then talk about what they want to talk about, which is not helpful if you're trying to engage with someone.
Exactly. And you're not learning about the other person, and the other person isn't buying while you're talking. It's to be listening and to, again, listen with the intent to really hear what they're saying. That was something that is a work in progress, but I have gotten so much better at that. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's amazing how much information and powerful advice and powerful examples there are out there when you're not busy talking, Karyn.
It's one of my favorite ones, actually, Karyn. And this is one of the things that I love too, is listen with the intent of understanding someone and not just with the intent of getting your point across.
Yes.
If we're only having this conversation so that I can say what I want, then it's not a conversation.
Listen to
That's
understand.
not what we should be having.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great piece of advice.
So last question is, what's the best book or article you've read recently, and what was your key takeaway?
One of the best books I read recently, and it's been out for a while, was How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. And I loved it because they really incorporate the concept of creativity and humor. And it's not a book necessarily about creativity and humor. It's like, how do you get that meeting? How do you get the attention of a prospect and somebody that you really want to talk to so that you can grow your business or grow your sales or whatever that may be? But really the thinking outside of the box ways that they look at how to get a meeting and how to connect with that other person, I thought was a very good read. And I was surprised that I hadn't come across it until just recently.
Well, I've learned a lot, and I'm reading your book too. I love the one where you talk about when if they're focused on price, and you always diffuse the situation by saying, "Where you're sitting down?"
Right.
And then all of a
how
sudden,
much is this going to cost me? Are you sitting down?
So you drink your own Kool-Aid. I love that.
I do. This is WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get.
Well, this has been amazing. I mean, I'd love to talk another hour and a half if I could. If somebody wants to learn more about you, Karyn, or or hire you as a speaker, I mean, I'm on your website right now, and some of you have these one-liners that are the headers are just so funny, like humor is power and funny means money. Lead with laughter. So you have so much to give. How can people learn more about you and hire you?
I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. I'm a speaker. What can I say? And a trainer and a coach. But, I would love people to email me. It's, Karyn Buxman, and let's have a conversation. Go to my website, check me out. If I have, and connect with me on LinkedIn. I love being on LinkedIn as well. I have, blog posts that I'm going to aspire to put up more frequently. I'm constantly writing. I'm constantly sharing. But I'd love to have a conversation, just a virtual cup of coffee. I have a link where people can sign up for a virtual cup of coffee for 15 minutes, and let's just compare notes. So Karyn at Karyn Buxman, and that's Karyn with a Y. And I also tell people I'm a nice Karyn. I'm not the kind that throws people under the bus. I've never harmed a barista. They've trashed our good name. But
Poor
I'm
Karyn,
ready to have
sorry.
a conversation.
Well, that's awesome. Karyn, thank you so much for the conversation.
My pleasure, Clint. My pleasure. Let's talk again soon.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to ClintonMPaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.